you for joining my presentation on the IVDR state of play from a notified body point of view. My name is Marta Carnielli and I work as Head of Certification for the IVD business line for TÜV Süd. Before I dive into today's topic, I'd like to say a couple of words to introduce the company I work for. So TÜV Süd is a notified body under both the directive and the regulations, both regulations, IVDR and MDR, but specifically for the IVDR, we were notified mid-2020 and can cover all product categories and all available conformity assessment routes. We issued our first certificate, that was the first certificate against IVDR globally in Q4 2020, and earlier this year the first certificate for Class D devices. Our IVD team, which used to be a relatively small team, has been steadily growing to get ready for IVDR, and it now counts more than 130 experts that are located in Europe, but also in Asia and in North America. So coming to today's topic, what I'd like to do is to have an overview, provide an overview of the key features of the IVDR. I would like to look at where we stand with the implementation of the regulatory infrastructure that is needed for the IVDR. I would also like to review some of the points, main points of working with a notified body. What are the different steps? And also share, last but not least, some high-level IVDR lesson learned. So let's look at a brief summary of the main changes that the IVDR is introducing. Generally speaking, some of the requirements are new and other were pre-existing but have been made stricter. For example, the requirements related to the device technical documentation and clinical evidence. There is also a focus on traceability related to the device when it comes to the implementation of the unique device identification system, but also for the various economic operators from the manufacturer to the distributor, authorized rep and importer that are involved in the provision of the device to the EU market. There is a stricter oversight for the post-market phase with implementation of various post-market surveillance requirements. There is a larger involvement of notified body in the assessment of the device. Under the directive, about 8% of the devices require a notified body involvement. This percentage is increased 10 times under the regulation. But also the monitoring and the surveillance of the notified body by the authorities has been made stricter. The scope has been expanded of the product, and one of the major change is the reclassification according to risk. Now, the directive already took into account the risk linked with the device. The high-risk devices were identified in a list available in Annex 2 of the directive. While this list was very simple and straightforward to implement, it was not flexible, meaning if a new high-risk marker was made available, it was not easy to classify it appropriately. And as such, the regulation implements a classification system that is based on rules and that manufacturers will have to apply when determining the appropriate way to market for that device. So if we look at the classification rules, 4 classes going from A, which is low risk, and D, that is the highest risk. 2 elements of the risk are taken into account. One, the risk for the individual patient, and one, other part is the risk for the public. So if I take as an example a class A device, for example, a buffer, the risk for both the patient and the public health are low. But if I look at a class D device, for example, a device that will be used to determine the suitability for blood for transfusion, here the risk is high for the individual, but is also for risk high for the public. Now, the regulatory infrastructure that is required under the IVDR is strictly linked to the classification of the device. So with Class A non-sterile devices, those will need, of course, to fulfill the requirements of the IVDR, for example, when it comes to the technical documentation, but can be placed on the market as self-declared by the manufacturer. All other device classes requires an involvement of the notified body. And there are essentially two routes for the conformity assessment that the manufacturer can choose, except for Class B when only one route is available, but for Class C and D there are two routes that are available that involve a notified body in any case. For some classes of devices, there are additional requirements. Specifically, if the Class C device is a companion diagnostic, there is an extra step that is required, and that is the consultation by the notified body of the medicinal products authorities. For Class D, so this is the highest risk, the IVDR expects testing by an external reference laboratory prior to certification, consultation with an expert panel if the device is a new device, and conformity with the common specification if those are available. If all of this is successful, then the device can be placed on the market. However, individual batches of Class D devices would still require testing by the external reference laboratory if that is available. And the regulatory infrastructure we just briefly looked at needed to be created. So when the IVDR was published and went into force in 2017, 5 years of transition time were given. However, those proved not to be sufficient, and so earlier this year the Commission published a revised transitional provision for those devices that were already on the EU market and required a notified body involvement under the IVDR, so the vast majority. This means that self-declared devices and any new device introduced on the EU market after the IVDR date of application needs to comply with the IVDR. For all the others, there are extended transition time that need to be used by all stakeholders to complete the certification against the IVDR. So if we look at the current status of the regulatory infrastructure, we saw one major element is availability of the notified bodies. There are, as of today, 7 notified bodies that have been designated. There are some more that are in the process, and the European Commission publishes roughly twice a year a status of notified bodies at each stage of the designation process. As you can see on the screen, the latest that was published in October this year. And here we can see that notified body number 8 is at the final opinion stage, so hopefully the designation for this notified body will happen in the next couple of months. And there are additional notified bodies that are in the process. So additional 11 notified bodies that are in the process. And you have here a summary of the differences compared with the previous, so the progress made compared with the previous published data of May 2022. Now, notified bodies are a key element, but they are not the only element of the regulatory infrastructure. We saw for high-risk devices European reference labs. Those are needed if they are designated. Legally needed, I mean, if they are designated. The process is ongoing. The call for application is open until the end of the year, and the current expected designation time is second half of 2023. However, in their absence, the notified bodies are still allowed to progress with the certification of Class D devices. The consultation process for companion diagnostics, so it was totally new, and it became operational in July this year. So it's still early days, but it's ongoing. The common specifications, those are, if available, they are mandatory for the corresponding Class D devices. We have a first set that was published again this summer, but more are being worked on and should be published in the next couple of years. A central element also in the implementation of the IVDR is the availability of the European database for medical devices. This is a huge project, as I'm sure you can appreciate. We currently have 3 modules that are available for voluntary use and 3 modules that are in development, and according to current schedule should be finished by the end of next year. Now, I would like to review the processes that you will need to complete when working with a notified body. So let's review each step of the IVDR certification process. The very first step is the so-called onboarding phase. What this is an initial feasibility study of the project. So here you would provide the notified body, for example, with the number and type of devices you'd like to certify and the timing, and the notified body will check whether or not they can support you. If this phase is successful, the next phase is the pre-application. Here you will be asked to submit a series of documentation explaining, for example, your company structure, whether or not critical suppliers are involved, the number of devices, and here really the project planning goes in more details. If this phase is successful, the next phase is the application. Here, the project planning is defined in more details. The application is signed by the notified body, and you'll be asked to sign a contract with the notified body. Following the application, there will be the quotation issue, so how much is it going to cost, the confirmation of the order, and the start of the audit and of the TD assessment. Well, at this stage, the audit will be registered in our system and then planned, and the TD assessment can start. And these 2 processes can go in parallel. If you look at the TD assessment, the appointed assessor will review in details what documentation is provided, and if any deficiencies are found, they will be communicated to you, and you will have, depending on the type of deficiency, between 15 and 30 days usually to respond. with the corrective action. When all the certification, all the deficiency are closed, the TD assessment is considered complete. In parallel, as I said, the audit will need to occur. There are two-stage audit. The first one is, I would say, a high-level review of the readiness of your system to fulfill IVDR requirements, whereas the stage 2 audit is the moment where the notified body will really look at all your processes and determine if they fulfill the IVDR requirements. There can be a maximum of 6 months between stage 1 and stage 2 audit. However, this is a maximum time, so they can happen much closer depending on the agreement you have on the notified body. In stage 2, the notified body will also determine, will also execute actually, if needed, an audit of critical supplier. You may have some deficiencies also during the audit, so you will need to respond to those. When those findings, as well as the TD assessment findings, are closed, the notified body will make a recommendation for the certification. Before, however, the certification takes place, there is one last review by either another group or anyway a different group of experts that makes the final decision and issues the certificate against the IVDR. And between stage 2 audits and the decision to certificate the device, the maximum allowable time is 12 months. Once the device is certified, that's great, but of course the notified body will be coming at least once a year to conduct surveillance activities. So this whole process, as you can see, involves various steps and is various stakeholders. As of today, it takes between 13 and 18 months, depending on how smoothly each step goes. We saw in the previous slides that the conformity assessment process involves various steps and can take several months depending on several factors, but one of these factors is the presence or not of deficiencies identified by the notified body during the conformity assessment process. So in this slide, I would like to share some feedback on the IVDR certification process. Specifically for the application phase, this is at the beginning of the process. And what this allows the notified body to do is, first of all, to confirm the device is an IVD device, and for example, not a medical device, but also to confirm that the classification proposed by the manufacturer is consistent with its intended purpose. Same for the code assignment. So if these are not clear, there will be discussion with the notified body, and of course, more time will be needed to proceed to the next step. If you look at the TD assessment, so the requirement for a device to have a technical documentation is not new. It was present already in the directive, but the IVDR dedicates 2 annexes, Annex 2 and Annex 3, to the requirements of technical documentation. Now, all the elements that are listed in those annexes need to be present in the technical documentation file for the device, for example, all the relevant labels. But also, it is important that when, for example, a process is explained, sufficient level of details are given for the notified body to be able to follow that process. For example, there is a section on manufacturing explaining the manufacturing process. The notified body must be able to follow that process. So there needs to be sufficient details for that. Another requirement of the IVDR is that the TD needs to be easily searchable by the notified body. A third point to take into account, and that is often raising deficiency, is the clinical evidence. So manufacturers were required to demonstrate clinical evidence, are always required to demonstrate that, but the IVDR requirements are much stricter. So especially for those devices that have been on the market under the directive, I would say the level of data presented, the strategy presented may not be sufficient for the IVDR requirement. Of course, the IVD directive data can be used, but they may have some gaps, and those gaps need to be assessed and closed. The third element is the audit. Now, here some warning are related to the procedures that need to be created to meet IVDR new requirement, for example, related to post-market surveillance, procedures related and process measure used to control clinical supplier, but also to fulfill the contractual obligation for example, the authorized rep, but also the PRRC. So again, these have been made stricter under the regulation. Before I conclude, I would like to say that although we are past the IVDR date of application, the IVD directive is not entirely gone. If the device was placed in the market under the directive with a notified body certificate, that notified body is still required to execute appropriate surveillance according to MDCG 2022-15. But also, if the device is still placed in the market under the directive, you will need to evaluate any change to design and intended purpose to determine if it is significant or not. And you can use MDCG 2022-6 to help you with this determination. So to conclude, over the past year, there were quite significant progresses made to build the regulatory infrastructure for the IVDR. However, there is still a lot that needs to be accomplished, and also a lot of devices that need to be certified. So although with the publication of extended transitional timelines, the majority of IVDs can remain on the EU market under the directive for an extended period of time, we saw that the certification under the IVDR involves various steps, and therefore it is critical that this process is initiated and progressed as soon as possible. What you have on this slide are some resources for your information, and with this I conclude my presentation. I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you, the organizer, for inviting me, and if there are any questions, just let me know. Thank you. Bye.